Okay, let's unpack this. We're about to take a journey, a real deep dive into the incredible story of how we became us.
Yeah, it's quite a story. There's this fascinating stack of material here, basically tracing our lineage way back, millions of years of evolution.
And it asks some really big questions, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
where did our story actually begin? Who was the very first us?
Exactly. And, is there one single thing, one essential quality that truly sets us apart, makes us human?
Right. So, our mission here is to dig into these sources, pull out the key moments, the surprising facts.
And those pivotal changes, yeah.
Yeah.
The ones that guided that long path from, distant ape ancestors all the way to modern humans is going to be quite a ride through deep time.
Absolutely. And our story, well, it starts way, way back, around 25 million years ago. The sources paint a picture of Earth going through some intense global warming.
Right. The ancient Tethys Ocean was changing, breaking up, closing off. And crucially for our story, these vast humid forests started spreading north out of Africa.
And our ancestors basically followed those forests. You see great apes spreading really rapidly.
Populating the ancient world from Europe all the way across to modern-day China. You hear names like Gigantopithecus, Ramapithecus,
Savipithecus too, yeah. The sources call it the planet of the apes era.
and it really was a time when great primates just dominated the canopy. For a long time, scientists were debating, which of these groups might be the starting point for our specific branch.
And the sources we've got seem to zero in on one place. About 13 million years ago, near the Mediterranean coast, in Spain, actually.
That's where we find Pyrrholopithecus, this pretty remarkable creature living in what was then a humid tropical forest. It's highlighted as a potential origin for our family lineage.
A potential origin, so it's still a bit mysterious.
Oh, definitely. It's still being studied, and
Yeah.
we're only just starting to understand how it might fit in, how it earns that title of being, a distant great-grandfather.
Okay, so let's try and picture Pierola's world, living mainly in the trees, eating fruit mostly.
Yeah, primarily fruit eaters. And they were actually quite heavy, too heavy to comfortably walk on the smaller branches like monkeys do.
Ah, okay, so they couldn't just scamper around on top.
Right, so they spent a lot of time hanging below branches, using their arms, swinging, moving underneath. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Go on.
While they were built for that kind of movement, hanging and swinging, the sources note they could actually position themselves on 2 feet. They could walk upright when needed.
On the branches. Upright.
Well, maybe on thicker branches, or perhaps briefly. But the ability was there, and that leads us to our first key nugget, really.
Which is?
Bipedalism. Walking upright on 2 legs. It wasn't some human invention down on the ground millions of years later.
No.
The ability actually developed in the branches. It was an ape invention, something we inherited.
Wow, okay. That's a bit of a mind bend. Walking upright started in the trees.
It fundamentally changes how you think about it, doesn't it? We often see bipedalism as this defining human thing, but the groundwork was laid way earlier, up in the canopy.
Incredible. Okay, so what about their society? How did Pierolas live together? The sources mention a pretty distinct structure.
They do. Females, it seems, stayed in the group they were born into for their whole lives.
Okay.
But males were forced out when they reached adolescence.
Forced out. Wow.
Yeah. So you have to imagine how incredibly difficult that must have been. These young males, suddenly alone, needing to find a new group that just might accept them. And intruders weren't exactly welcomed.
Sounds incredibly tense. You read about that young male trying to edge his way into a new group, facing down this potentially hostile alpha male.
Yeah.
You really feel the tension.
Absolutely. But in this difficult social world, something really unexpected emerges in the sources.
What's that?
It's this quality previously thought to be, almost unknown in the animal kingdom. Empathy. The ability to understand what others are feeling.
Empathy. 13 million years ago.
Apparently so. And maybe even more remarkably, it wasn't just understanding. They were affected by others' feelings. They had sympathy.
Sympathy, too. How do we know that?
Well, the sources give this example of an older female in the group. She senses the distress of that young male outsider, the one trying to join.
Right.
And his fear, his anxiety, it makes her anxious. It compels her to investigate, to try and understand what's happening with him.
That's amazing. Empathy and sympathy, these are such powerful forces. They're basically what allow us to live together today, aren't they?
Absolutely. They're the bedrock of complex societies. That shared feeling starting to emerge millions of years ago. It's profound.
Okay, so they lived in trees. But how did they sleep? You mentioned most mammals only sleep in short bursts, right? Very restlessly.
That's a crucial point. Corollas seem to have been revolutionaries here. They came up with an extraordinary invention for primate safety.
Which was?
They built nests up in the treetop.
The treetop nests, like birds.
Sort of, yeah. Platforms, really. Woven branches and leaves. Safe places high up. This allowed them to sleep through the night without that constant fear of predators catching them unaware.
And this leads to key nugget number 3.
Exactly. The revolution of sleep. Those longer, undisturbed, restorative nights allowed their mental faculties to improve significantly.
How so?
Well, we now understand sleep is vital for the brain, right? For sorting information, getting rid of the useless stuff, storing the important things in memory.
It's consolidation.
Precisely. Without this simple invention building a safe place to rest the evolution of our complex brains, well, it might never have happened. It was a critical step on the path towards becoming human.
So, safe sleep unlocks mental potential.
Okay,
Yeah.
what else was developing back then? The sources mentioned sharing knowledge.
Yeah, this is essentially the dawn of culture. You see mothers teaching their young which foods are safe, how to find them, how to pick the best ones.
So learning passed down.
Exactly. This transmission of vital knowledge from one generation to the next,
Yeah.
that is the basis of culture. Simple, but fundamental. Was their communication like ours? Did they have language?
Not articulate language as we know it, no. The language of Purollas seems to have been primarily physical. Grooming, touching, caresses.
Body language.
Very much so. And also symbolic things like offering gifts, figs, for example. But it was complex. Touching females could still be risky business, you know? It might provoke the alpha male.
Ah, the alpha. But the females weren't totally powerless against him, were they?
Not at all. The sources describe situations where the females actually defended that young male outsider against the alpha.
Really? How?
Their collective numbers, their unity, together they were stronger, they could face him down, and often the alpha had to back off. It seems among Purollas, females held significant social power.
Interesting. Female solidarity, even back then.
It seems so. And when social tensions did inevitably bubble up, another remarkable behavior pops up in the sources.
What's that?
Laughter.
Laughter, you're kidding.
Nope. Key nugget number 4. Laughter wasn't a human invention. Purollas apparently used laughing sounds to diffuse tense situations, to relax the atmosphere, resolve conflicts.
Wow. So it's an inheritance. That nervous laugh when things get awkward? That goes back millions of years.
Seems like it. It's a behavior pattern we've carried with us. They also clearly had a deep, practical understanding of their forest home.
How so?
Reading the signs of the forest, knowing what's going on, and using different alarm calls for specific threats, like a distinct call to warn everyone if a tiger was nearby.
A sophisticated communication system, even without words.
Definitely. And that young male we keep mentioning, the outsider, he provides a great example of knowledge transfer and innovation too.
How?
Well, he came from a different group, right? And his original group knew a technique this new group didn't.
Which was?
He showed them how to use a stick to fish termites out of their mounds. Pasty protein snack.
Ah. Key nugget number 5, the first tool.
Exactly. Using a stick, modifying it slightly maybe, as an extension of the hand to do something new.
A simple stick, but a massive conceptual leap.
An invaluable idea. Using an object to achieve a goal. And crucially, it could be learned, passed on. That's innovation spreading.
And you mentioned earlier that males had to leave their birth groups.
Right. And that very social structure, forcing young adults, particularly males, to disperse. It actually helped spread knowledge.
How? Because they carried ideas with them.
Precisely. That young male brought his termite fishing technique. One source even mentions an instance where a young male saved an infant using knowledge of medicinal plants he learned in his original group. So knowledge wasn't just building up in one place, it was traveling, mixing between groups.
Fascinating. But this Purolla world, this forest life, it couldn't last forever. You mentioned geological changes earlier.
Exactly. Things started shifting dramatically. Around 5 million years or so ago, Africa began its slow collision with Europe.
And that caused huge climate shifts.
Huge. The humid forests in Europe and much of Asia started to fragment, shrink, or disappear altogether. This pushed some ape lineages south. They became the ancestors of modern gibbons and orangutans.
And then something really dramatic happened in the Mediterranean.
Oh yeah, the Strait of Gibraltar closed up. Tectonic forces. And the Mediterranean Sea essentially dried out. Imagine that. A vast, salty, dead basin.
Incredible. But that opened a land bridge.
It did. It allowed Pirolas and their relatives to cross from Europe back into Africa. And ironically, at that time, parts of Africa, like the Sahara, were actually becoming greener. Forests were spreading there.
So they returned to Africa to these new forests.
And there, these descendants of the European apes evolved further. They adapted.
Into a new species.
Into a new species, yeah. One with new capabilities. Living near what's now Lake Chad around 7 million years ago, this is Sahelanthropus, often nicknamed Tumai.
Tumai. And this one is important because
Tumai is considered a really strong candidate for being our common ancestor with modern chimpanzees, the point where our lineage and theirs split. With Tumai, the march towards humanity really starts gathering pace.
Okay. So what was different about Tumai?
Well, they probably still use trees for safety, especially for sleeping.
Yeah.
But the sources indicate Tumai spent significantly more time down on the ground.
And that opened up new food sources.
Much wider variety, yeah. But getting that ground level food was often trickier or complex, meaning raising the young took much longer. Infants needed a lot more education, not just what to eat, but how to get it. Mastering tools, techniques. It took hours and hours of practice, learning from elders.
And the sources mention the females playing a key role here.
They do. They note that females often seem to have a greater practical instinct, maybe more ingenuity in figuring out new ways to get food, inventing techniques.
Interesting. And their bipedalism, was that getting better?
It seems so. More efficient walking on two legs, which offered advantages like, being able to carry food or tools or even infants over longer distances.
But the social structure changed quite a bit from Pirola.
Dramatically. With Tumai, it seems males became dominant. Society was organized around a pretty strict hierarchy, led by the alpha male.
And he asserted his dominance.
Often, yeah. Typically reminding the weakest members of his power. It became a world marked by constant rivalry among the males, jockeying for position.
But it wasn't just about brute strength.
Not entirely. The sources describe the alpha needing to build alliances, making friends with other males, maybe strategically cultivating relationships with older, influential females whose support could be useful.
Alliances, strategies, managing rivals.
Exactly. This is where the sources point to the emergence of politics. Real social maneuvering. Males spending a lot of time and energy on plotting and scheming.
While the females were doing what?
Mostly finding food and raising the young, it seems. A bit of a division of labor, maybe?
And access to females was key for the alpha.
Central to his power, yes. But here's another consequence of better bipedalism. Female genitals became less visible.
Ah, so males couldn't just rely on visual cues for mating readiness.
Right. They had to find other ways to figure out if a female was receptive. Check her willingness.
And this led to?
A really significant development in relationships. Tumai seemed to have invented preference. Pair bonding, maybe?
You mean choosing a specific partner?
Yeah. A male and female might choose to spend time together, away from the main group, exchanging gestures of affection, seduction, maybe. Desire became important.
More than just instinct.
Definitely. And it led to a new mating position becoming common, face-to-face, which is a huge shift from the more typical, often quick, sometimes forced encounters you see in many primates. It suggests more intimacy, more connection.
That's a big step. The sources also tell a really poignant story about an infant drowning.
Yes. The infant strays, falls into water, and drowns. And the mother's reaction is incredibly telling.
What did she do?
She refused to leave the body, just stayed with it. And the group gathered around.
What does that suggest?
It suggests Tumai were beginning to grasp the concept of death. Not just that something stopped moving, but the loss of life, the irreversible loss of that specific individual. They were becoming aware of finality, maybe even their own mortality.
Wow. Key nugget number 6, awareness of death.
And that gathering around the body, united in grief, the sources describe it as the beginning of ritual, potentially the first funeral ceremony.
We used to think only humans did that.
For a long time, yeah. But we now know other species, chimps especially, show similar behaviors. Still, for our ancestors, this growing awareness of death, and maybe the passage of time itself, that was a huge cognitive leap.
Amidst all this complexity, politics, relationships, awareness of death, something darker emerged too.
Yes. The sources describe a scenario where our Tumai group encountered another unknown group of Tumai nearby. Strangers, yeah. Gathered near a fig tree, enjoying some fermented fruit that had fallen. Easy pickings.
And the alpha male of our group saw them.
He saw rivals, yes. But he also saw females and resources, that fruit tree. And a truly chilling idea started to form in his mind. Something unprecedented.
What was it?
To kill them. To kill members of his own species. Deliberately. in an organized attack.
Oh, wow.
Key nugget number 7, the invention of war. The sources frame this as killing with premeditation, with organization, specifically to take the goods, the resources, the females of others.
That's sobering.
It is. The Tumai, tragically, invented warfare. And the sources note, from a purely cold evolutionary perspective, it offered advantages, gaining territory, resources.
Okay, let's jump forward again. Millions of years pass. Africa keeps drying out. The Earth is cooling, heading towards an ice age.
Right. Around 5 million years ago, the Sahara forests retreated further. Huge pressure on Tumai's descendants.
And this is where the path really splits.
Yeah, more clearly. One lineage adapted to the shrinking forests, evolving into modern chimpanzees and gorillas. They largely abandoned bipedalism, specializing in knuckle-walking quadrupedal movement.
And the other lineage.
Stuck with bipedalism, adapted to the changing environments, and continued down the human line. This is the Australopithecus family, spreading across East Africa. Think Lucy.
Right, Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. But then, around 2 million years ago in South Africa, a new figure appears in the sources. Sediba.
Yes, Australopithecus sediba. And the sources explicitly ask the question, is Sediba just another Australopithecus, or maybe the very first man? The start of the Homo genus?
Still debated, I assume.
Still debated. But Sediba lived through severe drought conditions. They still needed trees for safety, for refuge from predators.
But spent most of their time on the ground.
The vast majority, yeah, out in the open.
And food was scarce.
Extremely scarce during the dry season. They were relying on tough underground roots, bulbs, hard to chew, hard to digest.
What was their society like?
Pretty harsh, it seems. Females living in harems controlled by the strongest males. And when they did scavenge kills, only the alpha and his close circle got the best bits, the meager remains.
Grim. But even then.
Even then, we see that spark again, that ancient quality from Pierola.
Empathy.
Empathy reappears. The sources tell this story of a young male, not part of the alpha's inner circle. He sees an old female, she's lost her teeth, she can't chew the tough food.
And she'd starve.
She would have. But this young male starts chewing the food for her, making it soft enough for her to swallow, keeping her alive.
Wow. Empathy surviving even in the harshest conditions.
It's remarkable. But the overall situation for Sediba was dire. The species was genuinely facing extinction. They had these developing brains, they used basic tools, techniques, but they needed something radical, a revolutionary idea.
And the idea came.
It did. If the scarce meat, the carcasses, wouldn't come to them near the trees, they had to go to the meat.
Venture out onto the open savanna.
Exactly. Far from the safety of the trees, go looking for kills, actively scavenging.
That sounds incredibly risky.
Hugely risky, especially for a species that was still very much prey for big cats and hyenas. It challenged the alpha's cautious approach, but it was driven by sheer desperation, need for food.
And for those who took that risk, the payoff.
Immense. With profound long-term consequences, they found a fresh carcass out there. And crucially, they discovered the incredible value of fat.
Fat.
Yeah. The marrow inside the bones, the entrails, the brain, tongue, eyes. Incredibly rich in energy.
Yeah.
And vital for helping digest animal proteins efficiently.
So, key nugget number 8, the profound effect of meat, especially the fatty parts.
It wasn't just calories. It was a dense, high-quality energy source. It offered a lifeline, a solution for survival in that tough environment. Food for everyone who participated.
What were the immediate effects? More energy.
Feeling more energetic, yeah.
Yeah.
Sleeping better because they weren't starving. But the long-term impact, unfolding over hundreds of thousands of years, that was truly transformative.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you're eating easily digestible meat and fat, you need less energy for massive jaw muscles. You need less energy for a long, complex gut designed for tough plants.
Okay, so that energy has to go somewhere.
Exactly. It could be reallocated. And where did it go? Primarily to the brain.
Ah, the brain is energy hungry.
Extremely. So mental capacity improved. Body started to change too, becoming taller, slimmer. Physical strength still mattered, of course, but ingenuity, intelligence. That started to become the really decisive advantage.
They were already using basic tools like rocks.
Yeah, probably simple hammer stones, maybe sharp flakes. But this new focus on carcasses spurred new innovation.
How?
Well, the young male from the empathy story, he's now a leader figure, and he's this brilliant idea. Instead of trying to eat at the kill site where it's dangerous, cut the carcass into smaller pieces. Then you can carry them back to safety.
Smart. But that requires better tools.
Exactly. You need tools that can cut flesh, slice through hide, maybe even break bones to get at that marrow. So they started deliberately shaping rocks, creating sharp shards, basic cutting tools.
Mastering that must have taken time.
Millennia, the sources suggest. Lots of trial and error, learning how to nap stone effectively.
And this whole process, planning an expedition, making tools for it, it highlights a new level of thinking, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Key nugget number 9. Imagination and articulate language starting to play a bigger role.
Malediction.
The ability to conceive of a project. Let's go find a carcass, even when there isn't one right in front of you, to weigh the risks and benefits, anticipate what you'll need, like tools.
Man, language.
Early forms of articulate language were probably crucial. The sources describe the young leader training the group, using words to explain his vision. There's food out there, abandoned feasts, enough for everyone. Painting a picture with words to convince others to join this risky venture.
But this new way, relying on cleverness, on planning, it must have challenged the old ways, the alpha male's dominance based on strength.
Huge challenge.
Yeah.
The alpha saw his authority threatened by this upstart with clever ideas. And the venture itself was incredibly dangerous. There are still prey animals out on the savannah.
So a moment of choice.
A critical moment.
Yeah.
Fate of humanity, you could say, hung in the balance. Option 1, retreat back to the relative safety of the trees, stick with the old ways, but risk starvation as the climate worsened.
Option 2.
Option 2, follow the young leader, venture into the unknown, risk attack, but have a chance at abundant food, a new way of life.
And the group split.
The group split. Those who were maybe physically weaker, but more open to new ideas, more guided by imagination, they followed the young male. They risked everything for that dream of a better world, another way to live.
And the others, the stronger ones who stayed.
They stayed with the alpha, returned to the trees, stuck to the more traditional ways. They likely evolved into the Paranthropus line, robust Australopithecines, like the famous Nutcracker Man, or even species related to Lucy. But eventually, they died out. The climate kept changing, their food sources dwindled.
So it was the courage of those who left.
The courage of those who took the risk, guided by imagination and hope, that led directly to us. They freed themselves from total dependence on the trees. They essentially invented a new life out on the plains.
That's powerful. And from this Sediba line or something very like it.
Emerged a new species, one that was even more mobile, more exploratory. Homo erectus.
Homo erectus, the upright man. When do they appear?
The transition is gradual, but clearly Homo erectus is around by maybe 1.8, 1.9 million years ago. And then, around this time, you get another major geological event.
What happened?
The Isthmus of Panama formed, connecting North and South America. This changed ocean currents dramatically, creating the Gulf Stream.
And that affected climate.
Big time. It further cooled the Earth, pushing it deeper into the Ice Age cycles. Africa dried out even more. The great grasslands expanded, but also shifted.
And the animals moved.
The large herbivores started leaving Africa, seeking new pastures. And Homo erectus followed them.
Out of Africa.
Out of Africa. Driven by this incredible spirit of exploration, maybe conquest. They migrated into Europe, into Asia, traveling distances that just seem unbelievable. Pushing all the way to the Far East, we find erectus fossils in China and Java, into the unknown.
How were they able to do that? What made them such successful explorers?
Well, physically, they were remarkably well adapted. Which brings us to key nugget number 10. Homo erectus was built to run.
To run, like sprint.
More like endurance running. Think marathon runners. Their anatomy was perfect for it. Fully upright body, long legs, arms balanced for efficient movement, not needed for climbing anymore.
And cooling. Running generates heat.
Exactly. They had an extraordinary internal cooling system.
Yeah.
Significantly less body hair than earlier hominins. Lots and lots of sweat glands all over their body.
Like us.
Like us. And sophisticated ways to keep the brain cool even during strenuous activity. This gave them incredible stamina, probably more stamina than almost any other creature alive at the time.
So they could track animals for miles and miles.
Precisely. They weren't just scavenging anymore. They became active big game hunters, tracking prey relentlessly like wolves do, literally running animals to exhaustion.
Wow. Competing with lions and hyenas?
Directly competing, yeah. Using their endurance, they're developing weapons, better spears, maybe, and crucially, their collective organization, hunting together.
And their society changed, too.
It continued to transform, yeah. The physical size difference between males and females, which was quite pronounced in Australopithecus, started to lessen in Homo erectus.
Meaning,
physical strength became slightly less of the defining factor in social status. The rule of the strongest alpha started to be replaced, or at least supplemented, by the leadership of the cleverest, the most organized, the best planner.
Could a female be the leader?
The sources suggest yes. A female chief whose intelligence, foresight, social skills, political acumen made her the most effective leader for the group. It wasn't just about muscle anymore.
They also started changing their environment more actively.
Definitely. Not just reacting to it, but shaping it. Building more substantial shelters, camps, sometimes even putting up fences or barriers, maybe using thorny branches for protection. Creating home base.
That sounds like a more complex society.
Much more complex, with clearer roles emerging. Each member might have a task based on their skills. Someone's good at shaping stone tools, someone else at butchering meat, tanning hides, building shelters.
The beginnings of specialized labor.
Pretty much. Work and the distribution of tasks became fundamental to human life. And with that came new pressures, new kinds of social conflicts maybe.
And the leader's job became more complex too.
It had to be. Maintaining order, making sure food was distributed fairly, managing all these social relationships, internal alliances, maybe even relationships with neighboring groups.
They also started wearing clothes.
Seems likely, especially as they moved into cooler climates. Using plants, animal hides, bark for protection against the elements.
But would that create a new problem?
A new vulnerability, yeah. Clothes and maybe denser settlements created nice, warm homes for parasites, lice, fleas. So while their fear of big predators might have decreased slightly with better organization and tools, a new, tiny, insidious enemy emerged.
Always something. Their world was still full of mystery, though, right? Things they didn't understand.
Oh, absolutely. And Homo erectus seems to have had a deeply inquiring mind. One of the biggest mysteries, one of the most powerful and terrifying forces was uncontrolled fire. Wildfire.
A destructive force.
Hugely destructive. Could sweep through, destroy your camp, drive away the animal herds you rely on. A real disaster. But after one such fire, Homo erectus made a crucial discovery.
What do they find?
Amidst the ashes, they found animal carcasses, animals caught in the fire. And they tasted the meat.
Cooked meat.
Cooked meat. And they discovered it tasted amazing. Delicious. And it was so much easier to chew, so much easier to digest than raw meat.
And plants, too.
Cooked roots, yeah, also delicious. And incredibly, the sources estimate cooked roots required something like 16 times less energy to digest compared to raw ones.
16 times? That's enormous.
It's huge. So, key nugget number 11, the discovery of cooked food. And the impact was profound. Again, it's about energy.
Less energy needed for digestion.
It means even more energy available for the brain. Mental capacity continued to expand, allowing for more complex thinking, linking ideas together, constructed thoughts, maybe even new emotions developing.
And the sources suggest something else here, about beauty.
Yeah, it's speculative, but they suggest this might be where a true aesthetic sense began to blossom. An appreciation for shapes, colors, the play of light and shadow. New sensations elicited by the world around them. A dawning awareness of beauty.
Fascinating. But they couldn't make fire yet.
Couldn't make it, no. Only capture it from natural sources like lightning strikes or wildfires, and then desperately try to keep it going.
Which must have led to conflict, if one group had fire and another didn't.
Conflict, yes. Fighting over precious embers. Or maybe something else.
What?
Trade. The sources point to the very first instances of trade appearing around this time, potentially linked to fire.
Trading for fire?
Maybe. Exchanging control of a precious captured fire, or embers from it,
Yeah.
with one group for something another group had. Maybe skills like expert hideworking or high-quality stone tools.
Wow, the beginning of exchange.
And this capacity for exchange, for sharing not just within the group, but between groups, meant knowledge could accumulate and spread incredibly rapidly across vast distances, passed down through traditions reinforced by developing language.
Is that why fire use seems to appear relatively suddenly in the archaeological record across different regions?
That's one strong possibility, yeah. The idea, the technique of managing fire spread like wildfire through these growing networks.
Amidst all this practical and intellectual change, what about emotions? Relationships?
The sources touch on something really significant here, too. The emergence of the first real lasting couples.
Like pair bonding in Tumai, but stronger.
Seemingly more enduring, yeah. Relationships based not just on mating access, but on genuine selection, mutual desire, intimacy, companionship.
And aesthetics played a role.
Likely. Personal adornment, using colors from ochre, maybe decorations, different styles, could have played a part in attracting a mate and forming these bonds. The sources paint a picture of the story of love beginning to unfold. Bonds forming, growing, lasting.
That's quite moving. And having fire, domesticated fire, must have changed daily life immensely.
Oh, huge benefits. Warmth, obviously. Protection keeps insects away, keeps predators at bay. Light, banishing the fear of the dark. It could be used to cure ailments, maybe harden wooden spear points, make tools stronger. A transformative technology.
But perhaps the biggest transformation was still happening inside their heads. In communication.
Quite possibly. Key nugget number 12, language and storytelling. The sources link this era to continued development of the brain, particularly the left hemisphere, which is crucial for language, and also subtle changes in the throat, the larynx, allowing for a wider range of sounds, more articulate speech.
Making language much more complex.
Much more versatile. Now, they could probably evoke the past much more vividly, speak about the future, plan in detail, and crucially, they could recount experiences, tell stories.
Storytelling.
Yeah. The sources evoke this image of an old woman, maybe sitting by the fire, weaving tales. Stories that gave meaning to their hunts, their struggles, their lives, their ancestors, their world, making sense of it all.
And the sources pose a question here.
They do. Maybe this is the true core of what makes us human. Not just tools, not just fire, not just walking upright, but being the creature who can tell its story, the storyteller.
Homo erectus, the storyteller, the explorer, the firekeeper, continue to spread.
An incredible expansion, populating vast areas of the Earth, adapting to nearly every climate zone, from tropical forests to colder steppes.
And as these populations spread out, they became isolated.
Geographically isolated for long periods. And over time, they diverged genetically. They evolved into distinct new types, new species of human across the globe.
Who are we talking about?
Well, the sources mention lineages like the famous Beijing man in China, Solo man in Java, the intriguing Hofloresiensis, a hobbit on an Indonesian island.
Denisovans in Siberia.
Denisovans, yeah, known mostly from DNA. Neanderthals evolving and thriving in Europe and Western Asia. And back in Africa, the lineage that eventually led to us, Homo sapiens.
So, for a significant period, Earth was home to multiple human species.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At least 6, maybe more, different kinds of humans coexisting on the planet at the same time, each with its own unique culture, its own adaptations. A truly diverse human world.
But that didn't last.
No, because around, say, 100,000 years ago, maybe a bit earlier, Homo sapiens emerges in Africa.
Yeah.
And they begin to turn the world upside down.
How so?
They developed even more complex societies, showed unprecedented levels of inventiveness, leading eventually to things like sophisticated art, complex burials suggesting symbolic thought and belief systems, incredibly refined tools, and much later, agriculture, cities, writing, science.
What gave sapiens the edge? Was it just imagination?
Their extraordinary imagination, building on that foundation from Sediba and Erectus, was surely key. But it was also that whole cumulative inheritance, everything learned and passed down through Pierola, Tamai, Sediba, Homo erectus, all those millennia of knowledge and abilities.
A long apprenticeship.
A very long apprenticeship, combined with this intense impulse to live, to explore, and this fierce, almost insatiable desire to learn, to understand, to innovate. Sapiens were, perhaps, the great dreamers, the great questioners.
And this lineage gave rise to everyone alive today.
To the astonishing diversity peoples we see across the globe, yes. Homo sapiens then embarked on the final phase of global expansion, the last great exodus out of Africa.
Spreading everywhere.
Everywhere, mastering incredibly challenging environments, developing sophisticated navigation skills to cross seas, reaching Australia, crossing land bridges, or navigating ice sheets to reach the Americas, eventually inhabiting every major landmass on the planet, the first species to achieve that.
What happened when they met the other human species, like Neanderthal?
They definitely met them. And we know from genetics that they occasionally interbred. Many modern humans outside of Africa carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA. Some populations carry Denisovan DNA too, so there was interaction.
But
Ultimately, wherever Homo sapiens spread, the other human species eventually disappeared, replaced, outcompeted, maybe absorbed to some extent. The reasons are still debated, but the pattern is clear.
And as sapiens spread, their appearance changed.
Yeah, adapting to local conditions, skin color, hair texture, eye shape. All these variations arose as adaptations to different climates, different levels of sunlight, creating this incredible visual tapestry of humanity we see today.
But underneath those surface differences,
Deep down, as the sources emphasize, our core genetic inheritance is overwhelmingly the same, forged over those millions and millions of years of shared evolutionary history, going right back to those early apes.
so Homo sapiens, the sole surviving human species.
The father, the ancestor of the entire human race living today. The only human on Earth now. Shining, as one source puts it, with a million fires, that incredible diversity born from a single, long, complex journey.
What an incredible journey is right. Just thinking back from those early tree-dwelling apes like Pirola figuring out how to get a safe night's sleep in a treetop nest.
All the way to complex Homo erectus societies, trading knowledge, maybe even fire, telling stories around the campfire.
It's staggering. And we've seen how so many traits we think of as uniquely human walking upright.
Started in the trees.
Started in the trees, empathy, sympathy.
Emerging way back with Pirola.
Laughter as a social tool, the very beginnings of culture, using tools.
Politics and maneuvering with Tumai.
Awareness of death, the invention of war, sadly.
The development of love, pair bonding.
The power of imagination that drove Sadiba out onto the savannah. The profound act of storytelling in Erectus.
All these things have such deep roots, stretching back millions of years, evolving piece by piece through species like Pirola, Tumai, Sadiba, Homo erectus, long before Homo sapiens even arrived on the scene.
Yeah, it really wasn't one single invention, was it? Or one magic moment that made us human.
No, it feels much more like a cumulative inheritance. A buildup of abilities, generation after generation, species after species, combined with this remarkable, recurring willingness to take risks, to challenge how things were done, to explore the unknown.
Driven by that hope, maybe that dream of a better life, a different world. You mentioned the courage of that Sadiba group leaving the trees.
That moment feels pivotal, doesn't it? Risking everything based on an imagined possibility. That combination of inherited smarts and forward-looking imagination seems absolutely crucial to our whole story.
So considering this epic history, this long, long story of adaptation, innovation, exploration, migration, and these profound shifts in how we live, how we think, how we interact, what does it tell us about now, about the next chapter for humanity?
That's the big question, isn't it? After millions of years of evolution shaping us, what is the next decisive step for us as a species? Where does the story go from here?